Room 442 is brought to you by North Star Bets. That's a win.
Welcome into Room 442, another poor weekend for TFC as they lose 2-0 at home to the New England Revolution. I'm Sara, Poraria, joined along with Mikey Singh. Mikey, not great. First home game that they've lost this season, TFC. And honestly, just overall outplayed by the Revolution.
Yeah, the Revolution came in with a game plan, and that was to really suck the life out of TFC, take the crowd out of the game, and they executed it to perfection, right? I think when you look at the numbers of the game as a whole, just diving into it, TFC had more possession than New England, but it didn't feel that way because TFC had possession, but they weren't really doing too much with it. Not really too many big chances created by the Reds. And overall, just a really uninspiring performance for a team that has so much star talent. I think the fans at BMO Field, the reason why it feels so much worse than maybe a 2-0 result against the best team in the league is because of the way that TFC played. It wasn't exciting football at all. So it's another bump in the road, I think, for this team.
It seems like when TFC lose their matches this season, it's because of mistakes in the defense, which is their strongest component. We've talked about it time and time again, but it was the same thing in this match. Sigurd Rosted, obviously, poor fumble on the ball there. And then we saw the second goal came from a deflection off Sean Johnson, but then it was Shane O'Neill who I could have cleared the ball, and I felt like they were just kind of stuck. They weren't moving. They were all a little bit shocked at what happened. But, yeah, I mean, was it Matt Hedges that maybe they were missing again? Because we obviously saw him go out while they were warming up. Yeah. That's why Shane O'Neill played, but a big loss for them there.
Yeah, no, Matt Hedges is really important to this team, but I don't think you can just single out one player. You're right. Whenever we have been talking about this TFC team and them losing, it's usually because of they give up a little bit defensively. And obviously that Sigurd Rosted giveaways you referred to, that was one of those things. But that's one of the things we talk about all the time this year is how slim TFC's margins are. So that when you do give up a goal like that and chance like that, you're shooting yourself in the foot because you don't create a ton of chances moving forward. That's the thing they have to figure out.
Yeah.
As much as, over the weekend you can pinpoint defensive mistakes, but the best way to cover up defensive mistakes that happen to literally any team in the league, the best way to do that is by scoring more goals and creating more chances and, helping your teammate out who does slip up there. And TFC were unable to do that. So, yeah, it seems like, especially moving forward, we talk about this all the time, there's a pretty big disconnect with what this team wants to do. They're not on the same page. There's a bunch of moving parts there. They need to figure that part out. They need to figure out how to get the best out of their two best players in Singh and Bernardeschi.
So, okay, today was a big day in MLS. We saw a couple coaches get fired, Chicago Fire and New York Red Bull. Does this put pressure now on Bob Bradley, knowing that TFC are 13th of 15th, sorry. Yeah. Only 2 wins this season. We're getting to a point now where we can't just say one loss here, one loss there. It's becoming, it seems like a pattern. This team is struggling. And when you have a team that struggles, of course, you look at the manager. So we know 2 MLS coaches gone today. It's Bob Bradley in the hot seat.
The seat is definitely hotter than it was at the beginning of the season. I'm not yet there to say it's a hot seat because he was brought in for a project, right? He wasn't brought in to revitalize this team in one season. Now, heading into the season, expectations were raised. Bob Bradley himself came out and said he thinks that this team's going to be a good team. And they still might. We're a third of the way into the season, right? Obviously, results aren't quite there, but there's a bit of a logjam when you look at the middle of the table. So 1 win, and we're talking about this team in a pretty different light. The reason why I think his seat is slightly hotter is because it really feels like this team's identity isn't quite there.
Yeah.
And when you're a year and a bit into your tenure and you're still trying to figure out the best way to get an identity, that's when those question marks do arise. So, yeah, is he in the hot seat? No, because we know what this club invested to bring Bob Bradley here. We know the ties he has at the club, and we know how long his leash is to get this right. And we know that also when he did take over, the plan wasn't necessarily to have this team become an MLS Cup contender this season. I think things have happened along the way that have kind of changed the trajectory of this team, but there still is, if they get healthy, they get some bodies back, go through a little bit lighter of a schedule, there still is a chance that they do turn things around to at least be a playoff team this year. So
yeah, they have to, otherwise I think it will be
that's the thing, right?
Very dangerous.
Yeah, if you go to the end of the season, this team's still not in the playoffs, I think those questions will really start to get asked.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about depth time and time again. You mentioned it already earlier today, but lots of injuries going on for TFC, especially some big name players. You actually just came from training. We obviously know Ozo has been injured since last week or just about 10 days ago now, but Richie Larea uncertain for tomorrow in their match against Montreal.
Yeah, so a long list. Matt Hedges is a question mark. Obviously, we talked about left warm-up, lower leg. Doesn't seem like it's going to be too long-term. Michael Bradley still not progressing in the way I think the team would want him to. They have to figure out exactly what's happening there and try to get to the bottom of that. It doesn't seem like it might be too long-term. Victor Vasquez, he's out for a couple of months because he had a surgery on his foot. So a lot of lower body stuff, as you mentioned. Ozo, MCL, another thing that's going to be weeks for him to probably get back on the pitch. Jordan Perusa, lower leg, same thing. Shane O'Neill gone for an MRI today, lower leg. And then Richie Larea is what we learned about today, where he's not necessarily an injury, but he's just a little banged up from 2 days ago when they played their last match. So it's a quick turnaround, but you're right. The depth has always been a question mark with this team, and it's going to be really tested this time around against a Montreal team Tuesday night that is, they're rounding into form, and they look like they're fairly healthy.
They're ahead of TFC now in the table, and they were, at the bottom there for so long. So I think, though, it's like European football, when you see Champions League or Europa League, and then they're playing a game 2-3 days later in the league. This is when you can tell, how deep teams are, because this is really when it'll come and bite you in the pine.
Well, especially the injuries can't be coming at a worse time for this team because they have such a congested May. I think in May, if they win on Tuesday night, they'll have 8 matches in the month of May. Yeah. And we're just getting started. We're at the beginning of that. It really felt like it was like the start of that against New England, the way that it looked like they ran out of gas. There was frustration. A lot of things boiling over during that match, but you'd like to think that the team itself they have a strong mentality and they can bounce back from it. It seems like the vibes are still okay within that group. It seems like they have a really positive group from everything that I'm hearing, everything I've been told, everything that I'm seeing at training. It's easy to let stretches like this boil over, but it does seem like this team is pretty resilient, and at the forefront of that are guys like Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi. So I know they show frustration on the field at times, but I think behind the scenes they're bought into helping this club turn things around.
Well, we're going to see TFC in action on Tuesday against Montreal, and they're going back-to-back against Montreal, hosting them Tuesday for the Canadian Championship quarterfinals, and then over the weekend they'll be traveling to Montreal Saputo Stadium. Let's just go into the Canadian Championship match. Quarterfinal game, biggest rivalry, Canadian football, TFC, Montreal.
Is it still much of a rivalry? Do you feel that?
I think the thing is Toronto and Montreal cities as a whole, they have the rivalry anyways, for not even just sports, I almost think in culture and life, but of course Leafs and Canadians as well. So I think there would still be a rivalry.
I feel like some of the spark has gone down with that rivalry, and the reason being is because
both teams aren't as good as they were.
That's the thing, right? Yeah. A lot of this rivalry, there's a lot of history that predates it, but you think about some of the playoff runs. In 2015, TFC were eliminated by CF Montreal. In 2016, you had that absolutely epic series. In 2017, when you're not competing in really meaningful matches, the rivalry tends to simmer a little bit. This one's a meaningful match, though.
Yeah, because with the state of how both teams have started their seasons, I can't imagine either of them are gonna win the league, but they could still win a Canadian championship, and that's a trophy. Yeah,
neither of them will be thrilled either if they're knocked out of the Canadian championship at this point.
Quarterfinals.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a lot riding on it, just from a mentality and club profile standpoint. There's always a lot riding on it when these two teams meet in the Canadian championship. Now, Montreal, as you mentioned, they've kind of rounded back into form. 4 straight wins in all competitions, including a win against Vaughan Azzurri in the build-up to this tournament, the round before. Under Hernan Lozada, it's been an interesting time for this team, right? They started really poorly to the point where people were calling for Lozada's head just a couple matches into his tenure. It seemed like there was no connection, there's a disconnect, and then they went out and made that Kamal Miller trade, which I think face value wise, I still don't think they got anywhere close to his worth, as much as Kamal Miller is worth. But the two players they did acquire in Bryce Duke and Lassiter, they've come in and they've played pretty well for Montreal. So they're getting the effect that they wanted out of that trade, and that seems to have sparked something. They'll give a different look that we've seen this year. They play three at the back, the same way that Wilfred Nancy used to play. So it'll be a challenge with a Montreal team that's coming in with some momentum to BMO Field against a TFC team that had the life sucked out of him a little bit against New England.
Yeah, not to mention all the injuries that they are picking up. It is going to be a tough game for TFC, and that is Tuesday at BMO Field against Montreal. The second game against Montreal, obviously on Saturday. Mikey and I will be back Thursday to recap that Canadian Cup Championship game and then preview the MLS match against Montreal Impact.
Room 442 is brought to you by North Star Bets. That's a win.